Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 43 event, which takes place in Auckland, New Zealand. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 3 bouts, the final 3 bouts of the card. And pay attention to our staff picks article on MMAoddsbreaker.com because we might change our picks depending on the weigh-ins. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 174 went 2-1 to win 2 units overall. We won with our bets on Rory McDonald and Michinori Tanaka, but our play on Josh Shockley did not cash. Now, we also had a free bet, a parlay for 1 unit with the over in the Phillips and Letourneau fight. That hit, but the other half failed to cash when Ryan Jimmo was injured against Open St. Preux. Now, back to the present. UFC Fight Night 43 features a 10-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass this Saturday morning around 2:30 a.m. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the prelims is a light heavyweight contest featuring Gian Villante, who is 11-5, taking on Sean O'Connell, who's 15-5. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Open Villante minus 315, the comeback on O'Connell, plus 235. And the line right now, we're at 5 dimes, staying pretty steady, exactly the same, actually. It's only been out for a few hours, so we should make note of that as well. The lines have been, like I said, out there for a little while. Not all the sports books do have them up, but 5 dimes has all of the UFC Fight Night 43 matchups up. And that's what we're going to go by here. So Villante holding steady at about a 3-1 favorite. I think that's about right. You know, it's unfortunate because Villante is so talented. I mean, the guy has very solid wrestling when he wants to use it. He's got decent takedown defense. The guy's powerful on the feet. His striking keeps on improving. I mean, his strike defense, not the greatest, of course. And his cardio, not the greatest. I know he was sick or whatnot in his fight against Maldonado in Brazil, so his performance was definitely affected there. But overall, I mean, if you look back at his career, I mean, he typically tends to fade as the fight goes on. And I thought we were starting to see some improvement in that area, but I'm not sure. I mean, that's the question mark we still will have with Villante, no doubt about it. But as far as the talent goes, there's no question. The guy's an athlete. He's better than O'Connell in almost any area in this fight. I mean, the pure grappling submission wise, you got to give maybe a slight edge to O'Connell as far as offensive submission goes. I mean, he is training with guys like Jeremy Horn in Utah there. And he's a pretty well-rounded fighter as well. But on the feet, O'Connell really doesn't have much to offer. I mean, he is aggressive, so he's strong, but he has a little bit too much aggression at times, leaving himself wild, and he leaves himself open too defensively. So both these guys are very hittable. I think Villante's striking is going to be a little bit more effective. And O'Connell, of course, has that suspect chin a little bit. He's been knocked out, I believe, 3 times in his career. Now on the ground again, O'Connell is very talented. I mean, he's definitely more comfortable, getting the fight to the floor and working from top or bottom, and he transitions well. He does look for the sub. He's got decent ground and pound. And, I mean, he's the type of grinder that can definitely grind out a 3-round unanimous decision. I just think that's not going to be the case with Villante because Villante's takedown defense should be sufficient enough to keep this fight standing. And on the feet again, I think Villante should do more damage and probably finish O'Connell at some point. So that's why I'm going to lean towards Villante. So at 3-1 odds, as far as betting goes, I'm not sure if there's a ton of value there or not. But at the same time, as far as the pure pick goes, you got to go with Villante. I expect him to rebound here and get back on track. Hopefully for his sake, he does that because he does have so much potential. I'm just not sure if we're ever going to see his true potential.
And I'm in complete agreement for this one. Villante is just significantly better than O'Connell just about everywhere. He's a little younger. He trains out of a much better gym. He trains with, Sarah Longo compared to O'Connell, who trains with Jeremy Horn in Salt Lake City. And, Villante should have a wrestling advantage, which is O'Connell's strength. O'Connell usually likes to take fights to the ground where either he can work for submissions or, get a TKO with ground and pound. So as long as Villante can keep this fight standing, he should be in pretty good shape. Or if Villante really wants to, he can get on top position and ride this one out as well. Both guys have some decent power in terms of punching. I think Villante is definitely a little more technical than O'Connell. O'Connell's more wild. He wings his punches, but he does have some power. I mean, he rocked Jimmo in his UFC debut, so you got to watch out for that. But Villante has a pretty good chin. He should be able to take whatever O'Connell throws at him. Now, the big thing, as Nick mentioned, is the cardio. Villante says he has bronchitis in his last fight, but that was a fight he should have won. He won the first round easily, and then gassed really bad and couldn't take Fabio Maldonado down, and paid for it. That is a concern. Now, O'Connell, when he's on the feet, he moves forward and leaves huge openings. So if Villante patient enough, he should be able to find something just like Jimmo did in their last fight. O'Connell's defense isn't so great. His chin isn't so great. Kind of lacks technique, reaches with his punches. So I think Villante should be in pretty good shape on the feet if he wants to. And he should win this fight, honestly. O'Connell just isn't quite on his level. Now, dropping down to the featherweight division, we have another interesting contest between a pair of UFC debuters in Dan Hooker, who is 10-4 overall, taking on Ian Entwistle, who is 8-1 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Entwistle opens -165, Hooker plus 125, and the line has gotten a little bit worse for Hooker out there. So Entwistle is now -130, the comeback 110. So more support coming in on Hooker. And I can understand a little bit because, as far as looking at skill set, there's no doubt about it. Hooker is a way better fighter. The problem with Hooker is, his deficiency definitely comes on the ground, his sub game. Offensively, he's not bad. Even if Hooker gets put on his back, he attacks with some subs, triangles, arm bars. He looks to scramble back out. That's not too bad, but defensively, when he's going against a true submission artist, that's when he tends to struggle, with positioning, and sometimes he makes a mistake and gets subbed. That's why he's got a couple losses by sub on his resume here. That's exactly what he's going to face here, though, in Entwistle. Entwistle is one of these guys that is a very talented grappler. He's super aggressive on the feet. He's a on the ground. He's a submission specialist. That's why. On the feet, he really doesn't have much to offer either. He's not much of a threat at all. He does have a little bit of power going for him, but he definitely looks to take the fight to the floor. On the feet, I think his probably best attribute would be kicks, his kicking game overall. He throws plenty of kicks, but again, he doesn't mind if the fight hits the floor at all. And once he gets the fight to the ground, his wrestling's decent, and he definitely is a very aggressive attacks. He looks for your neck, looks for your back. Of course, one of his favorite techniques is definitely leg locks. So he definitely has a good heel hook, and that sort of thing. That's what he attacks for as well. Looks for when he's fighting. So he's the kind of guy that knows what he's after, and more times than not, looking at his resume or his record, he's 8-1 for a reason, and most of those have come by submission. So that's the intriguing factor here. Will Entwistle get the takedown early on and submit Hooker? If he doesn't, I think Hooker's going to probably win this fight. So it's a competitive line. Hooker's, again, I'll get a little bit more into him. He's more well-rounded as a fighter. On the feet, he does have a kickboxing background. He's young. We should mention that as well. Both these guys are fairly young, but Hooker has him by a few years as far as the age goes. So he's going to continue to improve his overall game. He's a tall, lanky lightweight. And he, again, on the feet, he likes to utilize, his jab, has decent right hand. He mixes his boxing up, pretty well. Even throws, some uppercuts and short elbows in there as well. And he does like to push forward on the feet. He has decent knees from the clinch. So there's a lot of good things about Hooker coming into this fight, and I'm actually looking forward to watching him perform in the future, in the UFC if he gets the right matchup. But unfortunately for him, I have to go with Entwistle here because from what I've seen, Hooker's takedown defense isn't the greatest. It's a little spotty. At times it looks like he can keep the fight upright, but, more times than not against good grapplers, again, he gets put on his back, and that's not where he wants to be in this fight. So solely based on the grappling alone, I'm going to slightly lean towards Entwistle. But again, I think there's more question marks around Entwistle. If he doesn't get the early submission, I think Hooker's cardio is better, and he's the better fighter. So it's one of those situations that I think the sub guy's going to win. But again, another very tough spot as far as betting goes. But I got to lean slightly towards Entwistle.
And I'm in agreement on Entwistle. I just think that the biggest problem here with Hooker is while he's a talented striker, he's pretty good when he's in top position, he has decent submissions in his own right, he is susceptible to being submitted, and he does not have very good takedown defense. You can be a great grappler, but if you don't have the wrestling to back it up, then, you can be in big trouble because, if you get on bottom, you're in trouble. If you get taken down, you're in trouble. If you can't get a takedown, you're in trouble sometimes. And if this fight stays standing, Hooker's gonna win. Hands down. He's clearly the better striker. He can kick better. He can jab better. He's got regular combinations that are better than Entwistle. The thing with Entwistle that makes him special is he's just extremely aggressive in looking for submissions. He's the type of guy that it goes all out for him, and if he doesn't get it, he's not going to win, as what happened in Cage Warriors. Now, the biggest thing to look out for here is if Hooker can survive. Because if he can even make it out of the first half of the first round, at least the first round, then I think that Entwistle is going to be mentally, he'll just break a little bit, and Hooker should have his way with him in the second and third rounds, probably get a stoppage. Really, the only way Entwistle's going to win is if he dives onto a submission, either gets a takedown, advances position and goes for something, or just dives for submission and gets it in that first round. The problem is he's just really good at doing that. I mean, his last fight was about 25 seconds. He did a diving for a heel hook. He looks for everything. So it's very scary when you're in there with him because a submission can literally come out of nowhere. Based on that purely, I'm going with Entwistle, but it's a very cautious pick because if he doesn't pan out with getting that submission, he will fold and Hooker will win. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have a interesting contest between Neil Magny, who is 10-4 overall, taking on UFC newcomer Rodrigo de Lima, who is 8-1-1 overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Magny minus 270, the comeback on De Lima plus 190 was my opener. Again, another line that's staying steady. And it seems about right. I mean, Magny has several advantages in this fight. First of all, De Lima's taking this fight as a late replacement, a short notice. So you gotta respect that. But his cardio to me is a question mark to begin with. Now, coming in on short notice, it's probably not going to help his cause that much. We should mention right away that De Lima, his brother is Prazeres in the UFC. He's already in the UFC. Prazeres at lightweight, of course, we all know that. He's a grinder, grappler, one of those type of fighters. So he has those roots and training partners to be around. So that's the kind of fighter that he is. De Lima's definitely more of a grappling-based fighter himself. He's the current Jungle Fight welterweight champion, so that's pretty impressive as well. Because we all know you got to respect the Jungle Fight organization there in Brazil. They put out some great fighters, no doubt about it. So, again, he's the type of guy that prefers to grapple a little bit, looks for takedowns. He has solid wrestling. It's not too bad at all. And again, he's so young. He's only 22 years old, I believe. So he always constantly improves his game. If you look back at some of his early fights compared to his latter fights, I mean, he's definitely getting better in all aspects, and he'll continue to evolve as a fighter and improve his game. On the feet, he is powerful, so he does have that going for him as well. He's a southpaw, so he's got that going for him. But again, he's not a huge threat either way. I mean, he basically looks to close the gap with his striking just to shoot for takedowns and grapple with you. So, but once he does get the fight to the floor, he can be very effective. I mean, the guy has good transitions. He likes to get positional control, drop ground and pound, and then looks for the kill. I mean, once he gets on the ground, he usually mounts his opponent, takes his back, and finishes the fight relatively quickly. So the guy definitely has some talent with pure jiu-jitsu and the wrestling and the grappling aspect of things. And on the feet, again, he does have some power, and he's not bad. He's going to continue to develop his overall style. He's facing a Magny, though, which has been nothing but impressive his last 2 or 3 fights. I mean, you can definitely tell that Magny's getting better in his own right. He's improving constantly. His takedown defense is getting better all the time, and he's going to probably need to keep this fight upright. So he has a better shot at winning. I think on the feet, Magny has a big advantage. I mean, he's got the obvious reach advantages. He's taller. He's a tall, lanky fighter. He's getting to be pretty good with his striking overall. He leads with his jab well. His timing is good. And again, he's got actually offensive takedowns and decent offensive wrestling to go along with it that he can actually control where the fight goes in most cases unless he's fighting a better, superior wrestler. And I'm not sure if De Lima's going to be that, especially if De Lima's cardio does let up in this fight goes to round 2, round 3, possibly. Magny's definitely going to be able to keep the fight standing in that spot. So really, I think Magny's going to have to weather the early storm against DeLima in round 1. He's got to be cautious, because DeLima's definitely going to bring it to him. He's going to look for those takedowns early and often. But if Magny weathers that early storm, I think it's his fight to win or lose. I mean, he is the better overall fighter at this point of his career. And I think his role is going to probably continue here, but there's something in the back of my head that tells me that you cannot count out DeLima in this spot. I mean, DeLima, again, could be one of those young guns that, with a few months off, or you haven't seen the guy for a little while, then all of a sudden he shows up and he's that much better. So, and a lot of times I do notice that. I mean, sometimes you look at a fighter on tape and he shows up in the octagon, even with the octagon jitters or whatever, he performs actually better. So we could see a decent performance from DeLima here, but you got to go with Magny again. He's more ready at this stage. He's the more capable fighter. It's his fight to win or lose, and I think he is going to probably get the nod. So I'm going to pick Magny.
Yeah, and this is another case where I'm in complete agreement. I just really think Magny is in a good spot here. He had a full training camp for this fight, while DeLima replaced a fighter on short notice, had only about a month to prepare for his UFC debut. Both these guys are fighting in New Zealand, so that's a big deal, but they'll both be at a disadvantage from that. What it's going to come down to for me is I just think on the feet, Magny is so superior. He's really started to come into his own in terms of using that reach advantage, and he's got the longest reach in the welterweight division by a landslide, and he's starting to use it very well. It's going to be very difficult for DeLima to get inside, to try to get those takedowns and drag Magny to the ground, as long as Magny's able to use his footwork, keep DeLima at the end of that jab, and just keep throwing straight punches. He's going to be forced to telegraph all of his takedown attempts. Now, what DeLima has going for him is his strength. I mean, he's got the nickname Monstro for a reason. He just kind of Hulk smashes his way inside and takes people down and just physically dominates them. On the feet, he really doesn't have much to offer, although he does have some powerful leg kicks, but it's going to be difficult to even land those because Magny's reach is so long. Now, on the ground, Magny's not a slouch, but it's more that he has decent offensive wrestling. His defensive wrestling's okay, and his defensive submissions is not that great, although, honestly, he might get a bad rap for that because he got tapped out by Sergio Moraes, and Moraes is fantastic. DeLima is not even close to as good as Sergio Moraes on the ground. He's much more raw and, just 22 years old. So, I think, Magny should be a lot safer if the fight does get taken to the ground. But it is still a little scary, especially in that first round. Now, if this fight goes past the first round, I think it's Magny's fight to lose. Just like his brother, Prazeres, DeLima is probably going to gas a little bit as this fight moves on. And that really hasn't ever been a problem for Magny. So I can definitely see Magny, as long as he doesn't get in big trouble in that first round, I can see him at worst case scenario outpointing DeLima at least 2 out of the 3 rounds to take a decision. So my pick's Neil Magny as well. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have another pair of 0-1 UFC fighters in Chris Indich, who is 6-2 overall, taking on Vic Gruich, who is 6-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, Indich opens -125, Gruich opens -115, so virtually pick him with a slight lean towards Indich. And I think that's probably the way the fight's going to play out. I mean, Indich is the younger fighter. He's got Gruich by, I believe, 10 years or so. I think he's got a bigger upside. I got to give Gruich credit, though. I mean, he was training with a crew over in Alliance, and you could definitely tell they had a positive impact in his overall game. Gruich is a pretty aggressive fighter. He prefers the ground battle as well. I mean, not being put on his back. I've been like his UFC actual official debut. That didn't fare too well for him. But as far as offensive grappling goes, I mean, he prefers top position. He could definitely finish the fight at times by submission. I just think he's got kind of a tough matchup in Indich. The only problem with Indich is, in my opinion, is that Indich tends to get a little bit too inactive at times, and that could cost him against Gruich. So that's why you're seeing a very competitive line. I think overall, though, Indich has the ability, has the potential. He's a better fighter. I mean, I think even on the feet, Indich is a little bit more technical with his striking. His hands are pretty good. He just doesn't let him go enough. He does have a little bit of power there as well. And it's even on the ground, I think his pure submission game, is actually not too bad. He's got a pretty sick guillotine. But if he doesn't get it again and it gets put on his back, well, he could be in a little bit of trouble there, but he does tend to scramble back up to his feet pretty well. So really it all depends on how this fight's going to play out. I think if Grujic is going to push the pace, pin Indic up against the fence a little bit, and Indic starts getting a little bit inactive, his defense, Indic's defense isn't that great. I mean, Grujic isn't either, but I have to give the slight edge in defense, striking defense to Grujic on the feet as well, because Indic does get tagged an awful lot. But that being said, I think that Indic could be the more effective striker. He's a more accurate striker. And again, I think overall, I mean, with the youth advantage, with everything that he's got going for him, you got to kind of lean that way slightly. Again, it's his fight, I believe, to win or lose. He has to get a little bit more aggressive, and he could probably win this fight, if not by stoppage, by a decision here. So I think it is going to be a very competitive fight, and if Grujic does push the pace and Indic lets him do it, he can definitely lose. But I got to go with my head here, and it tells me that Indic is going to be a little bit better than he was in his official UFC debut. And I do think there's a bigger upside to Indic. I'm not sure what it is. I mean, he was a little bit disappointing to me in his fight versus Walsh. I expected a little bit more from him, but at the same time, in this fight, this is definitely a winnable fight for him, so he should get the nod here.
And I'm in agreement. I mean, this fight is kind of close, mainly because I think Grujic is a little bit better on the ground. And while both of these guys had terrible UFC debuts, getting dominated with wrestling, I think Indic is probably in a better spot here. As Nick mentioned, 10-year age difference. He has a little bit more upside. I think Indic is the better striker. He doesn't have very good defense, but he has better offense than Grujic. And he's got a little bit more power, a little bit more technique, a little bit more diversity on the feet. So as long as this fight stays standing, Indic should be in really good shape. Now, if it goes to the ground, that's where it gets a little tricky. Grujic, he wants to get this fight to the canvas probably. He is decent from top position. He's got okay subs. He's got okay ground and pound. So, and Indic did have some trouble with the takedowns in his UFC debut. So if Grujic is able to implement that game plan, Indic might be in trouble. But I think Indic is a little smarter than that. He probably will keep his distance. He probably will be a little inactive at first, just to feel it out. So Grujic could take that first half of that first round just because Indic is trying to get the bout sorted out a little bit in his head. That is a concern, but I think in the end, Indic will be just a little bit too young, too athletic, and a little bit too powerful on the feet for Grujic. And I think he'll make him wilt a little bit as the fight goes on. So my pick is Chris Indic. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have a very interesting contest between Richie Vasulic, who is 9-2, taking on Roldan Sangchaan, who is 4-0. Now Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Vasulic minus 150, Sangchaan plus 110 was my opener. Vasulic right now he's at minus 160, Sangchaan is at plus 120. So a little bit more support coming in on Vasulic, not much though. And this is a very tricky fight. I mean, I could see this fight realistically playing out both ways. I think Sangchaan is a little bit more raw than Vasulic at this stage in his career, but he's got a bigger upside. I mean, he's only 23 years old, trains out of a good camp in the Philippines, of course, so he's got decent training partners, decent environment to work with and to keep on improving his overall game. But he's typically a striking-based fighter. I mean, he's developed some wrestling and he's developed some ground skill as well. I mean, it's actually pretty impressive as you watch footage on him. On the feet, he tends to be aggressive. He throws a lot of kicks, throws a lot of big punches. He's a little bit wild and he leaves some openings on the feet, especially with his boxing. But he can be effective. I mean, he could definitely throw some leather. And on the ground, again, he actually surprisingly, he does go for takedowns and he's successful at doing that. Again, against kind of lower level competition for the most part. So we'll see what he can do in the UFC. But his grappling and his stand-up game, I mean, again, for only being 4-0 and being so young, it's not too bad. And I think he's probably going to have some advantages early on against Vasulic in this fight. But I think Vasulic's been a little bit more battle-tested. I mean, even he's a tough smashes veteran. He shouldn't have been even competing on the show in that weight class. I mean, he was competing at 155. He fought the likes of Park. He fought the likes of Fletcher. And he hung in there. I mean, he got beaten in both of those fights, but you could see some positives out of Vasulic's game. And again, that was at 155 and this is at 125. Now against Scoggins, Vasulic just got, I mean, brutalized. I mean, that was a beatdown, no doubt about it. But Scoggins, I mean, from what we've seen from him, I mean, there's no real shame in that either because Scoggins is potentially a title contender. And he's got a huge upside as well. And Vasulic really didn't want to quit in that Scoggins fight either. If you look at it, I mean, Scoggins was dropping some bombs and the referee stopped it. It was hard to say that it was a bad stoppage, but Vasulic was definitely disappointed and felt that he can go on. So I think Vasulik's going to come into this fight a little bit more motivated to prove that he belongs in the UFC. I think that he does have some advantages in this fight. I mean, on the feet, Vasulik's not too bad. I mean, he's nothing to really brag about. He doesn't put his combinations together enough to be very effective, but it's okay. I think he gets him by in most cases, and he'll do okay. He'll hang with most people. Maybe not the upper tier guys at 125, no doubt about that, but he'll hang with most fighters at 125 on the feet a little bit. And on the ground, he's got some underrated wrestling. I think he's got some underrated grappling, and by far the ground is his best attribute. So I think he's going to probably have to weather the early storm against Sanchez here. And if he does that, maybe round 2, round 3, he gets his opportunities. He could either grind him out and get the decision win, or he could possibly, take his back and finish this fight off with the submission as well. So I think it's really Vasulik's fight to win or lose here. I think he's catching Sanchez at a good time because he is still so raw. I think if this fight was later down the road, Sanchez's improvement would be too much for Vasulik. But right now, I'm going to have to slightly lean towards Vasulik because I think he is the more proven fighter. I think he has something proven for himself and to the UFC out there, that he belongs in the flyweight division. And I think he's probably going to get the nod here. But this is another great fight that could go either way.
And I'm going to disagree on this one. Honestly, I just don't think Vasulik is that good of a fighter. Vasulik is, 31 years old. I think he's honestly getting this fight because he's more of a celebrity in Australia, and people are going to tune in, maybe sell some tickets to go watch him fight. He was pretty popular on the Tough Smashes show as well. I'm not going to give him any flack for how he performed on Tough Smashes. He was fighting as a lightweight despite being a flyweight, but I thought, he didn't look very good against Justin Scoggins. Granted, Justin Scoggins is excellent, but he got absolutely obliterated in that fight. And I think that Sanchez is actually a pretty talented up-and-comer. Watching him fight, he's just 23 years old, so he's got the 8-year age gap. Fights out of Team Lakai. He's extremely, extremely aggressive. I think Sanchez on the feet, he has some very good kicks, both to the legs and body, and he pursues the takedown very aggressively. He does not have very good top control. He's sloppy at times, and he leaves openings for his opponent to get back to their feet or to take his back or other things. But in general, he's pretty good at scrambles, and he's extremely opportunistic. Now, on the feet, when he's throwing punches, that's a little scary as well because his strikes are so looping. Like, he just wings haymakers with his hooks, and his overhand right was worse than the overhand right that GSP threw against Jake Shields, UFC 129. But I think on the feet, he's probably going to be able to outwork Vasulik. And on the ground, I think he can wear Vasulik down just with the pressure. And, he's just got that younger, hungrier mindset. I think Vasulik just isn't into MMA for the right reasons. Now, Vasulik is decent on the ground. He's got okay wrestling, okay submissions. But there's really nothing that special about him. Most of his wins were, against no-names on the local scene, and he got exposed a bit every time that he's fought somebody credible, whether it was Ultimate Fighter or in the UFC. So I think this is the one last time, and that he'll get exposed before probably getting his release. But again, Sanchez is pretty raw, as Nick mentioned, so he might leave an opening for Vasulik to take. But I think this is Sanchez's fight to lose, so I'm going to pick him. Now moving on, we have a lightweight contest between Jake Matthews, who is 6-0, taking on Deshaun Johnson, who is 9-0. Now Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Matthews opens -160, Johnson opens +120. Since that time, again, looking over 5 times, Johnson getting some love from the betting public. I mean, Johnson is down to -115, Matthews down to -125, so virtually picking with a slight lean towards Matthews. And you know what? I think that Matthews does have the edge here. I mean, both these guys are young, talented prospects, no doubt about it. Johnson, he's a former pro boxer. He's got really fast hands, good power to go along with it. He's got a very smart striking IQ. I mean, you watch footage on the guy, he throws his hands when he has to. He even mixes up some impressive body work to go along with it with his hands. But his level of competition is just awful overall from top to bottom. So he hasn't really been tested by good fighters. I mean, cardio is definitely concerned as well. I think because he's fought such low level competition. I mean, he's generally finished most of his fights early on. But he is definitely a talented athlete. He's still raw, but shows a ton of potential. I mean, Johnson actually even has some wrestling to go along with it. I mean, he's basically known as a striker, but he's developed, again, being so athletic. I mean, he's got some decent takedowns, decent wrestling. He's even got some submissions to go along with it. So Johnson becoming and developing that skill set that you want to see. And he's going to be an interesting addition, and I think a great addition to the UFC if he keeps on progressing his overall game. Now, that being said, Matthews, he's only 19 years old. I mean, he's a very promising prospect out of Australian. He's a Tough Nations participant as well. He lost by decision to Aubin Mercier, which is no bad result if you look at it now. I mean, the guy made it to the finals and performed relatively well. And people are calling him the next GSP. So to lose to somebody like that, you can, I guess, understand it a little bit more. And the UFC definitely likes Matthews. They see a lot of good in him as well. And I believe it. I see it too. I mean, looking at the footage, the guy's pretty well rounded. I mean, he's only purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I believe, but his ground game is a little bit better than that. I mean, he's got some decent wrestling to go along with it. He is aggressive wherever the fight takes place. Matthews has some decent stand-up skill. Johnson's a better boxer, but I think Matthews does mix everything up with his kickboxing a little bit better. So even on the feet, it'll be competitive. But I think Matthews is the more complete fighter. I mean, I think he can possibly get the takedowns. His submission game is a little bit further along as well. And overall, I mean, the guy's pretty solid, and he's only 19 years old, so you expect him to just keep on improving. And I really do think that it's his kind of fight to win or lose here. I think that, again, Matthews has to survive maybe an early storm from Johnson. But if this fight goes in round 2 and round 3, he's going to take over. I think that Matthews is just going to be a tough matchup for Johnson. Now, again, he's going to have to weather that early storm, though, and Johnson, with his hand speed and with that power to go along with it, he's going to have to be careful. But I think Matthews is tough enough to withstand that, and I do think that eventually either Matthews will grind out a close decision win or probably end up finishing Johnson. So minus 125 right now. I kind of disagree with the movement. I think that Matthews is a little bit better than that, and the line should be a little bit higher. So I am going to pick Matthews to win this fight. I'm expecting good things from both of these guys, though. So win or lose for Johnson, I think that he'll rebound eventually here, and he'll probably stick around the UFC for a couple fights, depending on the matchup.
And I agree that, this is Matthews' fight to lose. I just think Matthews has a real bright future. UFC thinks pretty highly of him to be giving him an opportunity to compete inside the octagon at just 19 years old. But he was that old when he fought on the Ultimate Fighter Nations as well, and he represented himself pretty decently. He just ran into a bit of a buzzsaw facing one of the future finalists in the opening round of the tournament. I think Matthews is a pretty talented up-and-comer. He's 6-0 for a reason. He pretty well rounded on the feet, actually, which was surprising to me considering he's so young, but he's pretty sharp technically. He's diverse. He mixes up his strikes well. He has good kicks, good knees, decent punches as well. Now, his boxing isn't quite on the level of Johnson's because Johnson was, a boxer. But I think everything else, the way he mixes it up, is actually going to make him a bit more of a threat on the feet than Johnson is. Now, what makes Matthews really scary is on the ground. He pursues the takedown. He likes to get the fight to the canvas where he can just pound out his opponent with either punches or and then open up submissions. But Johnson's not a slouch there either. Granted, my big problem here with Johnson is he's being built up like the old school boxers. He fought complete scrubs in all of his fights. I think out of his 9 wins, only 2 of the guys he faced had ever even won a fight before. He faced a guy that was like 0-11 twice. It was embarrassing, the level of competition he fought. And the one guy that had a decent record, he had a tough split decision against. So I'm not quite sold on Johnson nearly as much. I think he's going to get a harsh dose of reality very soon. But thankfully he is fighting somebody that's still very raw and young in their career. Now, my big problem here with Matthews is he has a tendency to pull guard, and it usually happens during failed takedown attempts. He'll just flop to his back and work from there. Now, he is active from his back. He throws up submissions. He sweeps. He gets back to top position, and then he's dangerous again. But that is a huge concern because Johnson does drop some pretty lethal ground and pound. Granted, the fight film that I saw was he was dropping huge ground and pound against 0-11 guys. So take that with a grain of salt. We're not exactly certain how good his ground and pound and top control and everything else is. But I think that Matthews is just a little bit more proven. You take into consideration the training on The Ultimate Fighter, some of the guys he got to work with, the coaches. He probably took it to the next level a little bit, and he definitely does have the brighter future, and he is fighting close to home. So I'm going to go with Jake Matthews here. Now, kicking off the UFC Fight Night 43 main card, we have a welterweight contest featuring former Tough Smashes winner Robert Whittaker, who is 12-4 overall, taking on Mike Rhodes, who is 6-2 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Whittaker opens minus 245. The comeback on Rhodes plus 175. Whittaker is now minus 300. The comeback on Rhodes is plus 250. So more support coming in on Whittaker early on. And again, I guess I can't blame him. I mean, Rhodes, his performance against Sullivan was very lackluster. He did take that fight on short notice. And you know what? The thing is, I think a lot of people were underestimating how much of a pain in the neck Sullivan is. I mean, and I'm saying that in a good way. I mean, the guy is just relentless. I mean, he's a hard guy to take down, Sullivan is. He's a hard guy to stop. I mean, he's very persistent and he stays on you like glue. So he's just a difficult matchup for a lot of people, I think, actually. He's just not the flashiest fighter, so a lot of people don't give Sullivan that much respect. But that was actually a very tough fight. And it was a close competitive fight, I mean, honestly. But I think that's why so many people are counting Rhodes out, because he did perform like that against Sullivan. And if you look at Whittaker is above and beyond Sullivan as far as skill level goes. I mean, Whittaker is an extremely talented fighter. Of course, he's a former Ultimate Fighter winner, and he's got a big upside to him. I mean, he's only 23 years old. Both these guys are young. 23 years old for Whittaker. Rhodes is 24 years old. So big upside to both these guys. That being said, the way these guys match up actually is very interesting. I mean, Whittaker, his hands are, man, like dynamite. I mean, the guy definitely throws with some serious intent. I mean, you got to be a fan of this guy. He's made me money in the past betting on him because a lot of people kind of underestimate him in certain spots. But that being said, I think he has a very tough fight in Rhodes. I mean, how these guys match up, the fight should stay upright and upright on the feet. I mean, Rhodes does train with the Rufus camp, and even though he might not be getting that kind of respect, he's a very decent striker in his own right. Whittaker coming off that KO loss to Thompson, I think Rhodes can possibly catch that chin again as well and end things that way. It's a very similar fight. I know Thompson has, you know, the better striking background, and he's going to get that. I mean, he's just a special striker, Thompson, and Rhodes might not have that, but at the same time, again, working with Rufus in camp, getting a full training camp for this fight, Rhodes is going to be prepared for what he has to deal with Whittaker. So I think this fight should stay up on the feet, and I think on the feet it's going to be a back and forth battle. I think Whittaker has the knockout power, the more devastating knockout power for sure. But man, if you look at Whittaker, I mean, he was even tagged and rocked against Colton Smith. So he kind of, you know, that doesn't sit well with me. I mean, he kind of worries me, and as far as that aspect goes, he's been he was rocked in almost all of his fights so far in the UFC. He's been tagged. Even against Court McGee, he was tagged. Again, Court, a very talented striker in his own right. I mean, he does bring it, pushes forward, and has some power to go along with it. So all of those guys have power, but still, I mean, that tells you how often Whittaker gets hit. And Rhodes is going to actually have, I believe, a 4-inch reach advantage on the feet, pure reach advantage. And I think that he's capable of landing on Whittaker as well. So in the striking realm of things, which again, this fight should stay upright, I think it's going to be competitive back and forth. And Rhodes is actually the more versed striker. I mean, he mixes up his kickboxing a little bit better. Even though he's been rocked in fights before as well, I think Rhodes' chin is a little bit better at this stage. He's going to be prepared and knows that Whittaker is like a little Mike Tyson out there on the feet, man. So he's going to know what to prepare for. And I think a lot of people are writing him off. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and pick Rhodes as the upset dog here.
And I know it sounds crazy, but I'm going to completely agree with you on this one because I just think it's a bad stylistic matchup. Matchups are everything. Styles are everything. And this is a really, really nasty matchup for Robert Whittaker. As you saw in his last fight, you know, he's very aggressive. We've seen this time and time again. He pushes the pace. He throws with bad intentions. He has a lot of power. But the problems with Whittaker is sometimes he gets too aggressive. His striking defense isn't that good, and his chin is bad. He got rocked by Colton Smith in his battle against the tough finalists, and then he got knocked out in his last fight by Stephen Thompson. This is a similar matchup because Mike Rhodes is a counter striker. Rhodes looked so bad in his last fight because George Sullivan wasn't really striking with him. It was more, Sullivan was just putting a lot of pressure on him. He was getting him against the fence. He was not throwing normal strikes. It was just an awkward performance. And of course, Rhodes did not perform at all. You know, he did not look good. A big letdown for people. And I think that's part of why this line is so crazy, because Rhodes didn't look so good. But I'm going to put that on some UFC jitters and just a weird matchup. But this fight, I think, is completely different. People are forgetting that, Mike Rhodes trains with Duke Roufus, one of the best striking coaches in MMA, and he's still so young, and his chin's just fine. So he can be in a situation where Robert Whittaker is pushing forward and throwing a big bomb, and he could eat that to land one, and I guarantee that Whittaker's going to be the one that gets hurt more. So I think Mike Rhodes' counter-striking style, this is playing directly into the aggression of Robert Whittaker. So it's just a bad matchup. Now, Whittaker could make up for that if he had some other parts to his game to round him out, but honestly, his ground game isn't that impressive. His submission skills aren't that great. His wrestling isn't that hot, and he's not that scary in the clinch. I mean, Whittaker is more just, he's better when he's in range in boxing, and that's right up Mike Rhodes' alley. So I really see this being a nightmare type matchup, and it's going to surprise a lot of people. I would not be surprised one bit to see Mike Rhodes not only win this fight, but potentially get a stoppage here. So I'm going to pick Mike Rhodes as well.
Now moving on in the featherweight division, we have Hatsu Hiyoki, who is 27-7-2 overall, taking on Charles Oliveira, who is 17-4 with 1 no contest. Now Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Oliveira minus 125, Hiyoki minus 115. So virtually a pick'em with a slight lean towards Oliveira was my opening line. Obviously, you guys are looking over 5 dimes right now. There's a big difference because Hiyoki has moved all the way to Oliveira has moved all the way to minus 190. The comeback on Hiyoki is plus 165. So some early action and some steady action coming in on Oliveira. Man, this is going to be a competitive fight. I mean, both these guys, in my opinion, are very similar type of fighters because they're so well-rounded. They got a little bit of length for the 145 division as well. The reach is actually identical. To me, I mean, just looking at everything on paper and then even studying footage, there's so many similarities. I know a lot of people are going to think that Hiyoki has a slight advantage on the feet. I actually think that's backwards. I think Oliveira offensively is a little bit more talented on the feet. Hiyoki can definitely mix up his striking okay and be effective at times, but I think I'll give the slight edge to Oliveira on the feet, like I said, offensively. But as far as toughness goes, I think Hiyoki's definitely been through more wars in throughout his career. He's a veteran. He's been around for a long time. So that is actually bad in some circumstances because he's been through so many wars. You know, his chin might be a little bit suspect. He's more, worn out, I think, throughout his career. But that being said, he's still relatively young. He's 30 years old. And I think, again, against a matchup with Oliveira, since they are so similar in a lot of ways, it's not going to really affect him there. But again, I think Oliveira has a little bit of an edge on the feet. On the ground, Oliveira offensively is just so fun to watch. I mean, the guy can submit almost anybody in the UFC if you slip up at all. I mean, that's how good this guy is on the ground. But again, defensively, we saw, in the past that he's gotten beat. He's gotten beat by Jim Miller, which was, to me, it was a surprise. I mean, he showed a little bit of suspect submission defense there. Of course, Jim Miller is a stud on the ground as well, so I guess you got to cut him some slack. But Hiyoki, a very good grappler in his own right. So defensively, I think there are some concerns on the feet and on the ground for Oliveira. But again, you look at the guy, how he performs offensively, and he's just a stud in all areas. So I think this fight's really going to take place in all areas, and Hiyoki's going to be game in all areas. I think he can get top position. His wrestling's a little bit underrated. I know he's been put on his back in the UFC thus far a few times, but Hiyoki's kind of hard to keep down on the ground, and he's always attacking with submissions as well off his back. So he has that going for him. I don't think he's going to be able to catch Oliveira from his back. I think he'd have more success if he gets on top, but I think that's feasible as well. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Oliveira because I think, again, offensively, he's just a little bit funner to watch. He's a little bit more effective. But the toughness factor and the way this fight's going to play out, I'm expecting a very, very competitive decision on the scorecards. And it wouldn't be surprising at all if Hiyoki pulls off the decision or the slight upset here. So my pick is going to be Oliveira, but I think where the current line is right now, it's a dog or pass situation because these guys are so well-rounded and such a close matchup.
And I'll slightly agree. I do think this fight's going to be incredibly close. And one thing that does scare me with Oliveira is that every time he's really stepped up in competition, it hasn't worked out for him. We've seen it, time and time again that, Oliveira stepping in there against the Jim Millers, the Donald Cerrones, the Cub Swansons, and the Frankie Edgars of the world. He's got finished in 3 of those fights, and he had a relatively one-sided decision loss in the other. So that is a huge concern because Hatsuyoki is a guy that is that step up again. And while it is a concern for me as well with Hioki, he came into the UFC with a ton of hype. I think he was the number 2 rated featherweight in the world at the time, and he really hasn't panned out as a top featherweight contender. He lost 3 fights in a row at one point. But Hioki's biggest issue has more been with, really good wrestlers with submission defense. And, Oliveira doesn't quite have that. I think Oliveira is more of that explosive, extremely crafty grappler, and Hioki's a pretty crafty grappler himself. So, I do think that what this is going to come down to is how they trade on the feet, and I think it'll be relatively even. I think Hioki has a little bit more power, and I think Oliveira will be a little quicker, and I think Oliveira will be able to move around and probably has a little bit better footwork, at least in terms of moving around the cage. And on the canvas, I think Hioki actually is the better scrambler. Like, he finds himself in some very interesting positions with some sweeps, but I think Oliveira is going to be much more dangerous in terms of actually finishing the fight if it goes to the canvas. Hioki does have an extremely good grappling acumen, but we really haven't seen him able to use it in the cage in terms of getting a submission or threatening a finish. He beat up Bart Palashevsky once, but that's been about it. It hasn't been there for him. So I think that youth might prevail here. Oliveira is just 24 years old compared to Hioki's 30, and this might be that one time for Oliveira to finally step up and get that big signature win. So I'm gonna pick Charles Oliveira, but not confidently because again, he still needs to prove himself. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with you guys here. I think Oliveira is more dangerous offensively. He has pulled off some really slick submissions throughout his UFC career. I mean, not just the typical ones. I'm talking calf slicers and anaconda chokes. These are not run-of-the-mill techniques. Hioki, coming in as a high prospect, he hasn't really lived up to that potential, and I think that's common from fighters coming from that scene over into the UFC. But both guys, they've also faced pretty good competition. It's just that Oliveira's level of competition has been higher. When he's lost, it's been against really top-level guys. And when he's won, he's come through when he should. I do think he's going to be the more aggressive guy. He tends to come forward and work at a faster pace than Hioki does on their feet. So that's going to help him win some rounds. And on the ground, I think Oliveira does have a little bit more of a dangerous game, whereas Hioki might just go for control. That's really the only way he's going to win rounds. So he does advance position quite frequently, but I just don't see him being dangerous and threatening. So I think probably the most likely outcome is this goes 3 rounds, and it's maybe a close decision, but I do think Oliveira is going to be doing enough to be winning more rounds than he loses. Maybe a rounds prop is interesting here. Maybe the over is interesting. It depends where the final lines end up, but I do have that lean to Oliveira just like you.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a heavyweight contest featuring Soa Palele, who is 21-3 overall, taking on Jared Roshold, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Roshold minus 230, the comeback on Palele, plus 170. That was my opening line. Some support, strong support on Palele. I mean, he's down to, Roshold's down to minus 140 right now, Palele plus 120. So all the early action coming in on Palele. I guess he's getting a lot of love. I mean, he has looked decent, since he came back to the UFC. His last performance was definitely the best of his career. He has that, impressive domination of, Pat Barry on his resume as well now. So he is starting to get some respect from the betting public. Roshold, on the other hand, he's had some questionable performances throughout his career. He's looked okay in the UFC, thus far. In a couple matches that he's had. Of course, he got rocked early on in that fight against Walt Harris. So I think a lot of people are believing that Palele has the kind of power to do some effective damage on Roshold. And you know what? They could very well be right here, but I see it playing out a little bit different. I think Rocholt's just better everywhere. I think Pelele, to have success in this fight, he's going to need to get Rocholt on his back, get positional control, drop some of that nasty ground and pound that he does have, before he starts gassing out a little bit. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think Rocholt's the better fighter almost everywhere here. Obviously he's got the wrestling credentials, to back that up. So I think Pelele is going to struggle getting the fight down to the floor. I think if anybody ends up on top, it's probably going to be Rochold here. He's got a good ground and pound game of his own, good top control. He's getting a little bit more intelligent throughout his career. You can see the progression in his overall game. He has, been tested now a few times too, so that's good. His chin is a little bit suspect. I mean, he's been rocked in the past, like I said, but at the same time, I think that Rocholt is training the right way. He's got the right, surroundings with Team Takedown, and he's learning and he's continuing to improve, his overall skill set, period. So I think, on the feet, Rocholt has an advantage. On the ground, he's probably going to get top position. And as far as cardio go, both these guys tend to fade, but Pelele fades a lot worse. So honestly, I mean, around a minus 140 or so, I think the public is kind of wrong on this fight. I think that Rocholt may very well have some value here because I think he is going to win this fight. It's just a bad matchup for Pelele. He needs to get top control, and I don't think he's going to do that. So I expect Rocholt to actually finish him, maybe in round 2, maybe before that, but I think it's probably not going to hit round 3, and I do expect Rocholt to win.
And I'm on your side here 100%. I think Rocholt is just the better fighter, hands down. So Pelele, he's kind of in this spot because he's 3-0 in his current run in the UFC, but those are not quality wins. Even Pat Barry, a popular UFC fighter, he had a losing record in the heavyweight division. I think that Jared Rocholt is actually a guy on the rise. He's big, he's strong, he's got a good wrestling background, and I think he's a nightmare matchup for Soa Pelele, to be honest. Pelele is the type of fighter that's at his absolute best when he can take somebody down and then beat them up with those, gigantic sledgehammers he has for fists. But when he's in open space, I don't think that he's nearly as dangerous on the feet because he's not very fast, he's not very agile, he's not very explosive. And when he's not in top position, he's in trouble. So if Rocholt is able to take him down, I think Pelele is going to be a fish out of the water. If Rocholt is able to keep this fight at distance, at range, on the feet, I think Pelele is going to be in trouble. If this fight goes past the first round, I think Pelele is going to be in trouble. He does not have very good cardio. So I think this is just a really bad matchup, and unless Rocholt makes a huge mistake and pulls guard or something, which I just cannot possibly see him doing, then I see him being able to get at this win, whether it's a stoppage or a decision. I just see Jared Rocholt dominating. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, here's a fun fact. When Soa Pelele is standing up, on average, he spends 15 seconds between strike attempts. That is one of the slowest attempt rates I've ever seen in UFC history. It's far and away the slowest on this card. So that speaks to your criticism of his cardio. Yes, he is a very slow-paced guy. He gasses out quickly, and when he went beyond a round, it did not look pretty. But he has connected on some guys. He has gotten some knockouts against people who, Pat Barry, one of them, has shown a little poor chin resiliency, shall we say. Rocholt, on the other hand, has been dropped several times, and yet he went on to win those same fights. So it's interesting here. Soa Pelele does have a lot of power, and it's gone pretty quickly. And so I think Rocholt, a former Division I wrestler, is very well designed to win this fight, to grind it out. I think another very strange fact is that the over-under here is only 1.5 rounds. But the over is plus money, actually, and I think that's very interesting. And I think if Rocholt takes a conservative view, recognizes that Pelele is dangerous early, keeps him at a distance, or tries to wrestle him, clinching, taking ground control, it plays to his favor. He could grind him down very, very quickly, and it may just turn into a sloppy fight. It's kind of weird. You see two guys on solid win streaks, and yet I kind of see this fight as being pretty sloppy, and slowing down pretty quickly, and maybe even going into the second or third round, before Rocholt, grinds him down. There is some risk for an early finish there. Pelele, he certainly has done it to other people. But I'm in the same boat as you guys. I think Rocholt is, a deserving favorite slightly. There is risk, but it also may take a little bit longer and look a little sloppier than we believe.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a middleweight contest, a very interesting one between James Te Huna dropping down with an 18-7 overall record, taking on Nate Marquardt, who's moving up with a 35-13-2 record. So, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Te Huna minus 190, Marquardt plus 150 was my opener. Right now, Te Huna over at 5 dimes is minus 220. The comeback of Marquardt's plus 180. So a little bit more support coming in on Te Huna. It's a tough fight because Te Huna's making the drop to 185 and Marquardt's going back up to 185. Marquardt was very successful, in his first run in the UFC at 185. I mean, made himself a title contender. He was one of the guys to beat. I mean, he was basically almost always around the title contenders point. That's how good the guy was. His wrestling's on point. His overall skill set is on point. I mean, Marquardt's a very talented, well-rounded fighter. Unfortunately for him, I mean, he has been knocked out 3 times now in his career. He's getting a little bit older. He's 35 years old. He's making the climb back up to 185 after a not so great outing at 170. I mean, of course, his fight against Woodley was the highlight of his career in Strikeforce there, but still, I think, beyond that, he hasn't really performed to everybody's expectations. So, that scares me a little bit, bouncing back and forth between weight classes and with him progressing in age as well. There's some question marks there, but Te Huna, I mean, man, he's been a little bit overrated throughout his UFC career, I think. And his chin is questionable. I mean, we just saw Shogun floor him not long ago. He has been rocked. I mean, Jimmo lit him up on the feet early in that fight as well. Te Huna was able to survive, but he's been rocked throughout his career. His chin has been checked, and it's been a little suspect as well. So you have 2 guys with suspect chins going at it here. Te Huna should be the physically bigger, stronger fighter coming into this fight, but we're really not sure what we're going to get from Te Huna at 185, and that drop could probably and will probably make his chin a little bit even more suspect. So it's a tough one as far as the betting window goes. I think that I give the edge overall to Te Huna because I think offensively, if he could keep the fight upright, he's probably going to do more damage on the feet than Marquardt because, man, Te Huna is such a heavy hitter. He definitely has some talent, with his striking, no doubt about that. On the ground, Te Huna's got some underrated wrestling, but overall, I got to give the ground advantage to Marquardt. I think he's got the better submission game. He has a better pure wrestling, so he might be able to get top position as well. And if he does, that's definitely a bad thing for Te Huna, as he's been subbed, I believe, like 5 times throughout his career. So Marquardt has that advantage going for him, but Te Huna does again have the power. He should probably carry with him down to 185, and he could be devastating on the feet. So to me, it's basically who makes the first mistake here is going to lose. And I think Te Huna could probably keep it upright long enough where he's going to land on Marquardt. So not a very confident pick here, even though we're talking about a 2-1 favorite Te Huna, because I think it is one of those situations where it's probably at the current line a dog or pass situation. But to be honest with you, I don't have much faith in Marquardt right now either, because we got to see what he's made of and if he's going to look like he once did at 185 once he makes the comeback to that division. So a lot of question marks around this fight, but it should be a good one as long as it lasts. I don't think it's going to last very long, but I'm going to slightly lean towards Te Huna here.
And I think this one, I think it's even closer than Nick says. Both of these guys are extremely flawed right now. Both are in their mid to early 30s, with Marquardt being 35, Te Huna 32, and it's just a really strange situation. We saw what happened with Nate Marquardt, where he dropped down to welterweight. His initial first fight was great. He beat Tyron Woodley. That's a huge win, but everything else just went completely down the toilet after that, with his loss to Tarek Safadine, his loss to Jake Ellenberger, and then his loss to Hector Lombard. I mean, granted, all 3 of those guys are top 10 UFC fighters, but those are still, and they were one-sided shellackings, basically. And same thing with Te Huna. He had a nice little run, but not really any big quality wins in the light heavyweight division. And when he did step up against the likes of Glover Teixeira, against Shogun, he got destroyed. He got finished in the first round extremely quickly. So it's a huge, huge concern here that both of these guys are so flawed. And I think both of them have poor chins right now. Marquardt used to be able to take a shot, but obviously he's been finished pretty badly in his recent performances. And then Te Huna's coming off of just a thumping from Shogun. One punch completely flatlined him.
So it's a bit of a huge question mark what's going to happen in this fight, because all it's going to take is one good shot from either guy. Both of them have a lot of power. I think I'm going to give a slight power advantage to Te Huna, but I think with Nate Marquardt, he's more dangerous in terms of what he's capable of. He can throw a more diverse attack. I mean, just remember his fight against Wilson Govea. It was like a video game, the combination he pulled off to end that fight. So I think there's all kinds of different variables here. Is Marquardt going to use his ground game? He should have the better wrestling. He definitely should have some better submissions. Te Huna's extremely vulnerable to submissions. So I think that while both guys are in decline, I'm going to stick with the guy that has a more accomplished middleweight record in Nate Marquardt, a guy that, was on the verge of title contention multiple times, fought for the title once, and then somebody that is dropping down when I'm not sure they even should be dropping down, and I have no idea how he's going to perform at 185. So I'm going to pick Nate Marquardt. I'm going to take a flyer on him and think that maybe moving back up to middleweight is what's best for him. Reed, what are the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I hear you guys are split here, and I'm going to lean with Brian on this one. At this price, I think the edge goes to Marquardt, and he makes an interesting upset play. We've talked a lot about the power, a lot about the chin suspicion for both guys, actually. Punch for punch, Marquardt actually has a slightly higher knockdown rate. He has 9 career knockdowns, Te Huna only 2, but on a punch for punch basis, Marquardt is still higher. They are similarly good with their accuracy. There isn't a huge reach differential here. And when it comes to their chin strength, well, they both have taken a lot of knockdowns. I mean, a lot. These guys are definitely on the decline when it comes to being able to take a punch. But punch for punch, Marquardt is still a little bit better off than Te Huna, who has been in the game less and has taken more knockouts recently. So I think when Te Huna has stepped up in competition and faced top level guys, it has ended very quickly. I think this is another step up in competition. Nate Marquardt is a longtime veteran in the sport. He's been around. He's been doing this at a high level, title contention. This is a guy who knocked out Tyron Woodley just a couple of years ago, which has never happened. Other people haven't been able to do that. So Marquardt is dangerous. He's dangerous with submissions, and Te Huna is a little vulnerable on the ground as well as with his chin. So I see multiple paths to victory for Nate Marquardt. I see him as almost 2-1 underdog here, and that's enough for a play. Now, I also think that the under of 1.5 rounds was appropriately set. You don't always see 1.5 rounds, especially for non-heavyweights, but both these guys are able to get caught. I just think that Te Huna can be caught in more ways than one. So yes, it probably ends early one way or the other. And I think the more likely guy to get the victory is going to be Nate Marquardt.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 43. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday morning around 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.